Welcome to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private.
Welcome to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private. My name is Alexis, and I'm a former alcoholic and addict, now in recovery. The Recovery Cast is a podcast created by people in recovery from alcoholism and addiction for people in recovery from alcoholism and addiction. This podcast is meant as a support tool for those in recovery, and everyone who participates in the podcast is in an active recovery program. We are not affiliated with any one recovery methodology, and will focus on a variety of different types of recovery, including 12-step recovery, otherwise known as Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Recovery Dharma, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and more. And a quick disclaimer, this podcast is intended to be informative. A podcast alone cannot support your sobriety and recovery, so we suggest it only as one component of the daily recovery routine. For more information on what recovery is, go to www.rehab.melbourne.
Awesome. How are you, Alexis?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. My voice is still a little bit gone, but we will push on, and we are going to get you a proper microphone as well soon. So everybody who's listening saying that this is really bad quality, well, we are just going to have to push on and share the message, and everything will fix itself in due course. Now,
life on life's terms.
Yeah, exactly. Look, there's things that we have to deal with that we can't control, that we just have to keep going and you know, doing what we can. That's basically
please be patient with us.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so today we have a cool reading from the Alcoholics Anonymous Daily Reflections book, and it's for December the 1st. New month. It's almost Christmas. How scary. Okay, so the reading today is, December 1, Suggested Steps. Our 12th step also says that as a result of practicing all the steps, we have each found something called a spiritual awakening. AA's manner of making ready to receive this gift lies in the practice of the 12 steps in our program, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, page 106 and 107. I remember my sponsor's answer when I told him that the steps were suggested. He replied that they are suggested in the same way that if you were to jump out of an aeroplane with a parachute, it is suggested that you pull the ripcord to save your life. He pointed out that it was suggested I practice the 12 steps if I wanted to save my life. So I try to remember daily that I have a whole program of recovery based on all 12 of the suggested steps. That's so funny. What do you think, Alexis? What's your experience on that?
I really like that analogy, and it's something I haven't heard before, that you have to practice the 12 steps in your life, so and them being suggested it's not that you have to pull the cord.
Yeah. It's not that you have to. You know, nobody's telling you that you have to. They're just saying it's suggested. I reckon I like that. There's lots of analogies that you can put in there. I was actually talking to one of my mum's friends who was watching there's a series on SBS about addiction that I am yet to look into, but I think we will touch on it.
My sponsee has been talking about that to me about that, actually.
Yeah. And look, they said that there was somebody in the series who relapsed, and
who's from. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they literally. I said to my mum's friend, if your doctor prescribed you antibiotics for an infection, would you take one of them every 4 days, or would you take them as suggested by the doctor? You know, and I'm like, that's the program. And look, we are not. As said in the disclaimer, we do not. This is not a 12-step recovery podcast. This is a recovery podcast. Yeah. And regardless of how you do your recovery, whether it is through a 12-step program or whether it is another way, it's really not super important. The fact is that you have to work your recovery program properly and properly, I mean, when I say properly, I mean, if you're not doing it properly, you're going to find out about it because you're going to be suffering and relapse might happen. If you're doing it properly, you are probably living life on life's terms effectively and not suffering too much and able to cruise through your life without a huge amount of drama. So that's literally what I mean by that. Do it as suggested by whoever, whether it's the way your day program suggests it or whether your counsellor suggests things or whether your sponsor suggests it. I'm not really concerned about that. What I am concerned about is the fact that you're working it to the best of your ability. Anyway, sorry, rant over.
Ollie, hold on. Can you hear that?
No.
Okay, sorry. There's just someone has a hammer drill going into the wall.
Well, look,
inside of the house too.
I'm recording from my kitchen because my next door neighbours are having a renovation and they have a concrete saw. So there's nothing we can do. We're just going to have to push on.
Okay. All right. Great.
Cool. So
sorry.
No, it's okay. Don't apologise. It's just the way things are. We can't change that.
Yeah.
So. Okay. Our 12, anyway, it says our 12 step also says that as a result of practicing the 12 steps, we have each found something called a spiritual awakening. Would you like to quickly talk about that spiritual awakening from your perspective?
Yes, actually, that was the key part that stuck out to me. Thanks, Ollie. So when I first came into recovery and I heard people, I heard that from doing the suggested things, it would be likely that I would have a spiritual awakening. And I was like, okay, great. I'm going to be some spiritual guru. I'm going to end up really evolving. It's going to be one magnificent experience that'll happen and it'll absolutely change my life. But what I've actually learned and from what my personal experience is that it's happened for me in stages. My spiritual awakening and my connection to my higher self has been something that I can't quite pinpoint down to one experience in itself. Yeah. It has been a collection of experiences. It has been a collection of conversations, of realizations, of surrender, like the way that I've surrendered in my program and the way that I've handed my will and my life over every day sometimes, in many different ways. That has what my spiritual awakening has equated to. And the way that I've grown and the way that I've evolved has, it's been for the better. I do my best. I'm not perfect and I don't try to be, but I focus on progress and not perfection. And I work hard towards living a life by the spiritual principles that I have learned in my recovery. And if not, even when I am struggling to be that way, I'm at least able to reflect upon myself through doing inventory. But my spiritual awakening has been it's been a large thing that has happened in many small increments. Yeah. That looking back over the last year and a half, I can see in different stages and in different ways that has occurred to me in my life.
Well, for me,
it's been a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. For me, there was no clouds parting and angels singing either. I had to. I had to just keep working it, and the change was revealed over a period of time. That's not to say that there were breakthrough moments in my journey. I think some of the most beautiful ones were when I found the book, as I've mentioned many times, The Power of Now, and simultaneously sort of got a conception of what a higher power was to be for me from that. That was a huge moment because I was able to immediately remove some of the pressure on myself to say that, hey, it's not always under my control and I just have to stay in the now and everything will continue as it does regardless of the input that I do. And that was just saying, that basically made me feel like I wasn't running the show anymore and that everything was going to be okay. Then I think when I finished the 12 steps the way that I worked them. I expected something, but it was revealed to me in the months and years after I finished the 12 steps that there is more to be revealed, and every time I learn and experience something, I grow from it, and that just builds on my spiritual path. So, I mean, yeah, that actually brings me to our other topic that we were going to talk about today, that's sort of not necessarily to do with the reading, but kind of is, which was boundaries. So let's take a quick break, and then we will get on to talking about boundaries in recovery.
You're listening to the Recovery Cast by Hills and Rangers Private. Now playing daily on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. For more shows, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.
All right, so you're on the Recovery Cast with Alexis and Oliver, and we are talking about boundaries. What do you think, what are boundaries to you, Alexis?
That's a really good question. Boundaries. Oh, God. Actually don't know.
I put you on the spot,
boundaries
don't I?
Yeah. Sorry, I should have been a little more prepared for that one mentally.
That's okay.
How do I define boundaries?
In our interactions with others,
Look, it's like a buffer between myself and other people, so that I don't end up feeling drained, and so that I don't end up resentful towards other people as well, boundaries are something that I put in place in my life when and where I know my limits are for whatever the circumstance may be. Whether it's just, I'm quite the introvert. I have a limited capacity for interaction, especially when it's in person. So just having the boundary over where and when those sort of interactions are going to stop, so that I don't end up completely drained and having to recover, is something that I've had to learn to respect for myself, for my own mental health, as well as putting, how do you say it? With my family are quite unhealthy, as we've discussed on this podcast before. So I have to put some very strict boundaries in place with them, so that they don't
affect you.
They don't affect me in a way. In a way that may negatively impact my well-being.
Your life and your recovery. Yeah.
Absolutely. What about you?
I think, I didn't really do any preparation on this topic. I had this idea yesterday, and I'm going to tell our listeners a story about why I had this idea. But boundaries, when I was listening to you talking, I thought, what are boundaries? And I think if you want to learn about what boundaries are, watch the movie Yes Man. Have you seen Yes Man?
I haven't actually. I've heard of it. Yes,
it's a Jim Carrey, who's one of the world's biggest strange space cadet people these days.
Very curious person.
He's a character who says no to everything, and he lives a very, very small, sheltered life. And he never gets out. He does his work. He says no. He works in a bank. At either declining or approving loan requests, and he declines every single person. And I can't remember exactly how it goes, but he joins this group of people that say yes to everything, and watches his life change, and everything becomes really, really wild. And he has some amazing moments, and he meets people and lives this life that is beyond his wildest dreams, just simply through saying yes. And then he also meets with some misfortune because of saying yes. And then I think he basically learns to say yes to the things that matter, and have healthy boundaries. And it really, I don't think they even talk about boundaries in the film, but it's just so boundary centered. And for me, what I learned, or what I learn about boundaries now, is that I have healthier boundaries and am more able to protect myself from overexerting myself and saying yes to things that in the long run won't serve me or won't be healthy for me when I'm thinking about my well-being and recovery. And then also by the same token, I don't say no to everything when, you know, there's no necessarily any reason to. So I'm living this balance between selfishness and over giving of myself. That's what boundaries are to me. And my story that I'm going to quickly go into was yesterday I overextended my boundaries. So I said yes to something that, given my precarious state at the moment with my voice, I agreed to go and walk a friend's dog who is unwell, and the dog actually latched onto my arm and started biting me, and it was a really interesting situation because it upset me, and I ended up having to, discipline the dog, and it's a big dog, and I love dogs. I've got a dog at home, but it was just a moment where I thought, hang on a minute, Oliver, you would have been better staying at home and resting your voice rather than doing something for someone else. Even though it was a nice thing to do, I overexerted myself in terms of my boundaries. And what I've learned from that now is I just have to watch my boundaries and try to pay more close attention. And look, I'm 4 years and a couple of months clean by now, and I'm still learning about these things. So it doesn't matter, I obviously didn't end up with relapsing over the whole situation, but it was just turbulence that I can now learn to avoid through, the growth that's resulted from the suggested steps that we were talking about earlier. I've learned to protect myself, and I've learned to live this life of giving to others, but also thinking about myself, which just wasn't a thing when I was in active addiction. I would do all kinds of things that were just, there was no thought about other people or about myself and the well-being of either parties. So that's what we learn in recovery. And
how amazing is that? You know? Like, to be able to make those choices for yourself that respect and honor your, your autonomy, as well as puts in place, as I said before, buffers that also protect other people from when, you may feel like lashing out because you're being overexerted, or you feel like you've been attacked or something, So,
literally. And
literally.
My friend is not well, and for me to return from the walk with my shirt ripped and bruises up my arm from this beautiful dog that thought that I was a squeaky toy, and because he doesn't know me very well, he just thought, I'm going to play with this man and I'm going to bite him. And then I had to say, hang on a minute, I'm the boss, you're a dog, get in your lane. And that upset him, and he's not well. He needs to focus on getting well. And it was just, that's an example of how my boundaries being weak can actually affect other people. He's now thinking about this dog being like, my dog's a monster, when this dog's just a dog, So we learn these things in recovery, and look, I will walk this dog again, and if he mucks around, I'm going to say, no, no, Fido, get down.
Yes, no, Fido. Something that's pretty cool that I've also learned as well is that it's okay for your boundaries to change. Something that you may not be okay with, you may end up being okay with, and something that you may have thought that you were okay with, you may realize that you're no longer all right with that happening, and you have all the autonomy in the absolute world to put a stop to that, to put a boundary in place. So just a reminder for our readers, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you think that you're okay with what was happening and you're no longer okay with it, you have every right to say no.
Good.
You have every right to stop in that moment.
Yeah.
And have that respected as well.
Yeah.
So,
and the things that you used to be, the things that you weren't okay with, you may actually be okay with in the vice versa. Yeah. We learn and we grow through this situation, and we grow through this experience of learning how to live in recovery. And I think that's what it's all about. It does change. And I mean, a very real thing about boundaries is, perhaps we're in recovery for a while and we decide that, okay, when is the right time to go clubbing again? When is the right time to hang out with friends who are going to be, having a beer or a champagne or whatever it is? Yeah. Do we say no? Do we put those boundaries in place, or are we safe enough to do that? And I think as a blanket rule in your first year, no. But but
No, yeah.
but
Yeah.
you
But
know,
that can
everybody's
change,
different.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, for
Yeah.
me, I lost the obsession to use very, very quickly, and I, in early recovery, put myself in some situations that you might say would be dangerous for my recovery, but I survived with zero issues. But I think the thing is that you have to listen to yourself and listen to your, you know, what your boundaries really are, and how do we know what our boundaries are? I think I've talked about that mindfulness and that awareness of watching the watcher in previous episodes. Sometimes we may have to watch the watcher and be in that space and say, how does my true inner self feel? What feelings am I observing? And am I feeling uncomfortable? And I think with boundaries, we don't have to say yes to something and then sit through the whole thing. We can leave at any time. And vice versa, if we say no to something, we can choose to join at any time and experience a situation. So we have to be really monitoring it in real time to avoid either disaster or missing out on something. And there's also that FOMO thing of that fear of missing out, which I think is quite dangerous in early recovery, you know, to say, well, all my old friends are going out, I want to join them, you know, where does that end up? So we have to really watch that and have that higher self just monitoring the situation, don't we?
Of course, yeah. And it's also like we have to make sure that like the people that we're friends with are respectful of our recovery and understanding that it is, quite a serious thing. You know, some people that we used to party with may not really take it quite seriously and may think it's okay to have a drink, you know, just because you put down a drug or vice versa. And it doesn't quite work like that. A drug is a drug is a drug. You know, and you can end up putting yourself in a very risky situation where you thought that you may not be triggered and end up really triggering yourself. So just remember to pay attention to your patterns.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And those
you know?
friends that say, oh, are you still doing those meetings? Or aren't you cured? Like, can't you have one now? You know, you got to remember that they don't necessarily understand your situation. So for me, those people aren't in my life anymore. As much as I love them, I have to just let them go and say, be free, live long, prosper, be happy, do you, but I'm going to do me. And if you don't respect that, then that shows that maybe you are not the kind of person that I need in my life at this juncture.
Yeah. That's right.
And you know, that's great, because better than the alternative of feeling as though we're missing out and keeping that person in our life and having them put our recovery at risk and have to go around the merry-go-round again. Yeah. So look, my challenge, you know, I love these challenges. My challenge for our listeners today is to think about what our boundaries are, and you know, you don't have to necessarily change anything at this stage, but look at your situation and say, is this serving me? Is this good for my recovery? Is this good for the other person that's involved? And think about maybe changing it or keeping it the same. That's the challenge. And watch yourself grow from that.
Yeah, can I add something? Like, to our listeners, the ways that you learn to survive may not be the ways that you want to continue to live. So heal and shift.
Wow. Where'd you get that from?
I have it written down in my journal in front of me.
Cool. I like this journal.
I came up with when I was writing. It's my recovery journal. But I write all my little like tidbits and notes from like my interpretations of the JFT and like you know, some things I hear in a meeting or in therapy, and
Wow. Well, let's do it.
Shift.
Let's do an episode on journaling next, I reckon.
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Alrighty. Nice one. All right. Well, thank you, Alexis, again for joining me as the co-host. I look forward to getting you a proper microphone. But until then, thank you for listening to another episode of the Recovery Cast, proudly brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private. Please get in contact with us. If you have any questions, jump on www.rehab.melbourne. Until then, take it easy, think about those boundaries, and have a lovely day. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Recovery Cast. For more, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.